This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. That was a fast one, Jack. Last I knew, I was going to be talking to Mac, and then there's your smiling face.
Yeah, it was my youngest daughter's birthday. We were out to dinner, and I just got in under the wire. I'd given myself enough time, but I was in a generous mood. I said, does anyone want dessert here at the table? And of course, just about everyone took me up on the offer. Just about everyone at the table in the family.
All right, welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, and I am joined by co-host Jack Hirsch, former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. Now he's Bob Arum's best friend. I see the post on social media, shaking hands. Jack, you're big time. I'm just hanging along. I'm a tag along. Besides the birthday party, how are you? We had some good boxing this week. And I have a big rant that I am going to run you over with once we get started.
Well, I can't wait, Frank. You know, it was odd. I saw all the big matches, but as a fan, I was going to purchase the pay-per-view show from Vegas, headlined by Tank Davis.
I did.
For my publication, Boxing News, they asked me to cover the show on the Zone to send in a report. You know, the one with Aline Paro upsetting Subriel Matthias for the WBO. You know, I mean the IBF, not WBO, IBF junior welterweight title. But so I got up early the next morning, not knowing the result of Tank Davis, Frank Martin, and not knowing the Benavides Vacic result. And I caught both those fights on YouTube as if they were live. So I jammed it all in. But the picture on YouTube, when you get it the next morning, it's not as crisp and not as clear as when you get the pay-per-view or when you sing, you know, the original telecast.
Right.
But it's acceptable. You know, it's barely acceptable, you know, to view the fight.
All right, let's talk about Matthias, since that's the fight I didn't see. I read about it. I understood that it wasn't a pretty fight to watch, but he boxed a smart fight, and there was no dispute about who won the fight. Would that be correct?
Yeah, exactly. You know, Matthias was talked about like he was going to be a player in the 140-pound division.
He was a 7-1 favorite.
Yeah, and consider this. He had a 20-1 record. All 20 of his wins were by knockouts. He was heavy-handed. It was the first show that Matchroom's Eddie Hearn ever put on in Puerto Rico, and Matthias was the hometown favorite with Tito Trinidad leading the cheers. It was all set up for him to win big, but Liam Paro from Australia, he didn't read the script. I mean, he fought in a very fearless way. He's not much of a puncher, but he had a lot of good side-to-side movement, and he stood in front of Matthias a lot of the time, and his best defense was his offense. Paro kept punching. Whenever Matthias would land a big punch or start to gain momentum, Paro would
answer back
all the time, all fight. And the referee, Louis Pabon, has a good reputation normally. He didn't have the best night. I mean, he kept harassing Paro all fight long. It made me kind of wonder, a Puerto Rican referee in Puerto Rico for Puerto Rican fighter. Okay, something about it, you know, to the naked eye, it looked like he was favoring Matthias big time, and finally takes a point away from Paro after continuously warning him. The commentators on the Zone were furious with the referee, and And I don't even know why he took the point away. Exactly. Was it use of the head? Was it holding? Was it, because he wasn't, yeah, for whatever reason. I don't want to even speculate anymore about it. Paban would have a reason why he took the point away. So they go to the official scorecards, and I'll be honest, I had it close. I only had Paban up by 1 point. And I'm thinking it's in Puerto Rico, no way he could get the decision. And he got the decision. I mean, the judges had it fan. Two of them had it 115, 112. The other one 16, 111. So I was the one favoring the hometown fighter. I actually showed hometown bias, believe it or not, even though I would have scored, the fight for Paro had I been an official judge.
Okay, so big upset. Was it a good fight?
It was a very good fight, but Paro is not going to be a major player in the 140-pound division. There's so much talent there.
That's a fast track.
A very fast track. But if one of the big names is looking for a belt holder who he could beat, Paro's the guy. Paro's a very good, solid fighter, but he's not exceptional. He's beatable. It's like he's renting the title in a certain sense until the first big name decides to get it. If it's a Shakur Stevenson, he'll relieve him of it. If it's Tank Davis, he'll certainly relieve him of it. Or all the big names. And who knows, maybe a fight will be made Teofimo Lopez and Paro, and Lopez would find Paro hittable, even though Paro could adjust his style to just circle around Lopez, and those type of fighters we've seen like Jermaine Ortiz and Sandor Martin give Lopez fits. But there are fights out there now for Paro because he has a valuable piece of real estate, the IBF Junior Welterweight title.
All right, Jack, let's talk about the big fight, which was Tank Davis and Frank Martin. I bought the show. I watched the two main events. We'll get to Peter Benavidez in a couple minutes. Look, Jack, you like to ride me about being a Tank guy, and I am a Tank guy. Tank is one of the 10 best fighters in the game. And when I said I was going to come at you, I don't really mean you. I don't know where you're going to fall on this, but you know what I'm getting tired of? I'm getting tired of the narrative. Who's he fought? They said that about Crawford. They say that about Boots. And they say that about Tank. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know. I can't speak for other people, but I saw with Crawford. I see that with Boots, and I see that with Tank. Tank is cerebral. He can box. He can punch. He's very hard to predict or anticipate what he's going to do. The knockout of Frank Martin was the way he set it up. He let Martin dictate the fight. It looked like Martin's jab was bothering him. He made Tank come forward. He even landed some good counters on Tank, but Tank was just setting him up. Tank is an outstanding fighter. I think he doesn't get the credit, Jack, that he deserves because he's not the most articulate guy. He's associated with Mayweather. He's seen as a Mayweather fighter, but I'm sorry. The guy could fight. And to all you guys out there that are complaining, who'd he fight? I'm not going to go through the names, but I know this much. He's fought good guys, and he's beat them conclusively. He beat Barrios easier than Keith Thurman did, and that was at a lower weight. And, Jack, let me tell you something. Frank Martin, I would pick him to beat George Kambosos tomorrow, and Lomachenko gets all the credit in the world for beating Kambosos, who would not beat Frank Martin. But all I'm hearing guys say is, who did Tank fight?
Don't give anyone credit for beating Kambosos. Now, because Matt Hughes did it, and Kambosos was given a gift decision. I'm sorry I cut in.
Okay, but Lomachenko's getting all kind of props right, Jack. So my point is this. Who could Tank fight that would shut people up? There's one name out there he could fight. If he beat Lomachenko, they'd say he was old. The only guy he could beat that that would shut up the naysayers would be Stevenson, and we're going to get that fight eventually. But Jack, I'll end with this. Tank, he's not quite Terrence Crawford, but he reminds me he has a lot of Crawford in him, and the guy's just an outstanding, borderline great fighter, and anybody that knows what they're watching should have seen that Saturday night.
Frank, would you agree with me with this? And I agree with the points you're making, by the way. You said it really well. Crawford was considered, right after beating Spence, the number one fighter pound for pound in the world. And then, in a way, joined him, and there was a debate, Crawford and Inoue. Then Usyk beats Fury, and we consider what he did moving up from cruiserweight. Now there's a threesome now. Would you agree with me now, and this in my opinion, there should be a foursome? I think Tank deserves to be grouped with the other three when we talk about the best fight in the world, pound for pound, and you can flip them any way you want. I would still lean towards Crawford for the simple reason Crawford has never had a serious challenge in his career. He's been so good. Usyk, he's been hard-pressed a little bit, even in his heavyweight debut, a little bit when he was a cruiserweight, even though he always came through. And Inoue got dropped heavily in his last fight. He was hurt in a way that Crawford never was.
And struggled with Donaire the first time.
Right. And the worst I could say about Tank Davis, Pitbull Cruz, he won that fight decisively. Okay, didn't knock out Pitbull Cruz, but Cruz would be a tough nut for anyone the way he kept coming. And the Raleigh Romero fight, he stabbed Romero in the 7th, but he lost rounds during that fight. I guess kind of sizing his guy up. But Crawford's lost rounds to guys in the similar way. So I want to say now, we have 4 guys we got to group when we talk about the best pound for pound. And even though Crawford is still my guy, any way you flip it, I'm not going to be too critical of you if you say it's Usyk, Inoue, or Tank. If someone has them number one pound for pound, I'll say I disagree, but I'm not going to say you don't know what you're talking about. Crawford's got to hold serve in August when he fights Israel Madrimov. He's got to hold serve. If he has a great performance and he's dominating, I think he puts himself, leaves himself in the number one position. But if he has a so-so performance, the doors open up to the other guys. And I can even maybe say Tank Davis is there. If there's any criticism of Tank, and this is a Wall Fighters, Frank, you mentioned Shakur Stevenson. If you truly want to prove you're the best fighter in the world and you really believe it, say the hell with it. I'm taking every challenge out there. Get me Shakur Stevenson. I'll knock him out. Because I'm going to tell you something, Frank. For the last 3 years or so, I felt Shakur Stevenson would beat Tank Davis. Tank Davis wanted no part of Shakur Stevenson. Now it's a pick'em fight to me. I might pick.
It is a pick'em
fight tomorrow. Tank's ring IQ, his overall ability. I have to think he'd have a good chance of solving Shakur's style because he's a thinking man's fighter, Tank.
As long as he didn't give too many rounds away. But Jack, that's a tough fight. Ask me today, I would pick Tank because I saw him last. But I agree with you. I think there's a case for Tank to be among the top 6 guys as far as the most complete fighters in boxing. You want to say he's 3rd, 4th, 5th, 2nd, maybe. I'm with you. Crawford's still the guy. But Tank has really shown a lot. His fights are the same. Like Crawford, he gives up rounds, figures it out. But I can tell you this, Jack. I was watching that fight, and I was impressed with Martin. I always thought he was good. Remember, this guy was an all-state wrestler, a good football player, and he's shown that he has potential in boxing. So to rip Tank for beating him, and at the end, it wasn't close. You don't see knockouts like that. Tank is one great finisher, and he's good. He's good at setting you up. And what he did was he let Frank lead. figured out what he was doing as far as reaching, throwing the punches, even or leading, set him up for some counters. And I said, okay. And then once he picked it up and he started letting his hands go, I think Frank realized that, maybe I'm not the alpha in here, and this guy was carrying me. And then when he got through, Jack, that uppercut that he snuck in there with his left hand, that was a thing of beauty. And then the straight right, the left that followed it, man, you just don't see that every day.
If I make this statement, and it's pretty bold, and I didn't even think about it until we're doing the show now, Frank. If I said Tank Davis is the hardest punching lightweight in boxing history, at least in my lifetime, let's put it another way. I can't talk about the Ike Williamses or Sam Langford when he was a lightweight. But in my lifetime, if I said that Tank Davis was the hardest puncher, immediately people will say, no, Roberto Duran, hands of stone. But I'm going to tell you, he has more one-punch power than Roberto Duran.
More explosive than Duran.
More explosive. That's the way of putting it. Okay, think of it. He hits harder than any lightweight I've ever seen for one punch.
Jack, I would have to think about that, but I would not, pick a fight with you. It's plausible. I think Edwin Rosario was a big puncher at that weight. Ike Williams we know about, but we can't go back. We can't speak because we didn't see him. Duran was more of a physical guy that beat you down, where Tank can just get a couple shots in the fight. Now, guys are going to say, well, who did he fight? They're always going to say that. Look, Tank is in the conversation, and he may be the best puncher in boxing right now. When I say that, I don't necessarily mean the hardest. Like, it's comparing like Joe Louis to Foreman. Louis was a better puncher. Foreman may have been a harder puncher, but Louis had a better delivery system, hit you cleaner, and can get the shots off better. And that's the way Tank is. And Tyson was like that too. He could get the shots off. But Tank is complete, and we saw he's tough. He took some big shots in that fight. He was faced with adversity, and the commentators are even saying, this is the most he's been pushed. He came through with flying colors. Jack, I really do think. Go ahead.
Frank, I enjoyed when Tank Davis went back to his corner and he's talking with his trainer. He's focused. He's figuring things out. He's analyzing the fight as it's going along. He knows exactly what he wants to do. He's a thinking man's fighter. Because he's such a hard puncher and he can be very aggressive when he wants to be, we don't think of guys like him. And even Roberto Duran in his peak wasn't thought of as being a smart thinking man's fighter. We tend to think of the Mayweathers, the Sugar Ray Leonards as thinking man's fighters.
The punchers never get credit for being thinking man's fighter, Jack.
They don't get credit, but they oftentimes are. And Tank Davis is a perfect example of that.
But I'm just so tired of the narrative. Well, who did he fight? Jack, you've been around this sport for a while. You know guys that have managed fighters and brought fighters along. It's hard to get wins in professional boxing. Okay, it's easy to sit outside and say this guy isn't any good or that's easy. But you know what? When you have to send your guy to fight, I'll never forget my buddy managed Darrell Wilson when he fought Shannon Briggs at the night of the heavyweights in Atlantic City back in '96. So we go to the weigh-in, and you know what? It's Shannon Briggs. We know he's being built up. And Jack, Shannon Briggs that night, because my buddy had to fight him, or my buddy's fighter had to fight him, Jack, he looked like the biggest, scariest guy in the world. It's different when you have to fight the guy, and you realize how tough it is to get wins. What do we hear Peltz talk about all the time? Guys come in and they want soft touches because they know how hard it is to get wins. And so when you get a guy who is beating elite top 10 guys conclusively, you have something there. And the narrative that he hasn't fought anybody, Jack, you were around. I remember what do they say about Ali today? Fought the best opposition. But you do remember back in the day, they weren't praising Ali's opposition that much. Bill Gallo wrote columns saying that Joe Louis fought better guys than Ali did. Nobody would say that today.
Oh, the talk was the first coming of Ali. Oh, could he take a punch? Whatever. And we learned what that is. But listen, look at Tank Davis's last two opponents. Frank Martin would have been good enough to beat an ordinary belt holder. Okay, he would have been good enough. He's good enough to be a champion. And I'm going to make a prediction. Frank Martin is going to win one of the sanctioning body belts at one point. I'm confident that's going to happen. Before his career's over, he's going to at least win it one time, maybe a two-time belt holder.
I don't think that's a reach.
Frank Martin is going to get there. Okay, he's talented enough. And he stopped Ryan Garcia, Tank Davis. That's a monster victory. I don't want to hear, well, Garcia was weight drained. Just like I don't want to hear, no offense, Frank, well, Garcia cheated with the poundage, which he did cheat, but if they let him get away with it and go through with the fight, so be it. But that's another argument. But the point is, he did knock out Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia agreed to make weight. No one forced him to. He made weight against Tank Davis. And I don't want to hear later it weakened him. There's always an excuse. Then go
Jack,
through with the darn fight.
In either of the two fights you mentioned, I don't think the weight altered the outcome. I think it played a part, but I don't think it changed it completely. I think that Garcia would beat Haney, and I think Tank would beat Garcia, regardless of what they did with the weight. He's just a better, more complete fighter, and he took Ryan's heart in that fight.
Well, let me say, you mentioned early in the show about Tank being thought of as a Mayweather fight. Well, the two of them are feuding right now. They're not together. And what happened, Mayweather's longtime associate, Leonard Ellaby, isn't with him anymore. And
right.
Leonard Ellaby,
now it's Richard Schaefer.
Leonard Ellaby was never a promoter. Let me make that clear. Leonard Ellaby was basically, I want to be polite in the way I say it because Leonard Ellaby is a nice man. He's basically an office guy.
A gopher.
Well, I hate to say anything that would be demeaning, but Leonard Ellaby never made any decisions.
No.
Despite what's said. So now, but Leonard Ellaby is a good, solid guy. And that doesn't mean he didn't counsel Mayweather at times and sit down and talk with him. But Mayweather was the boss, doing everything. And Leonard Ellaby was never a promoter. Just stop it. I don't want to hear this stuff about Leonard Ellaby being a promoter because he was never any at any point, in reality. But
Jack, Tank doesn't have a good personality, and we know that means something today. Terrence Crawford's not the most articulate guy. Either is Earl Spence. That plays a part in it, where Anthony Joshua has a great personality. He can be articulate, and that warms you to him. Tank is just an unbelievable fighter, and because he's had some problems out of the ring, I think people hold that against him, and they think he's more of a street guy than a cerebral fighter. But he is.
Did you see after the fight, Ryan Garcia climbs on the ring apron and he's wearing a sweatshirt or something? Tank's #1 fan, and Tank is hugging him. There's a real affection between the two guys. They really like one another. You could tell. And then Garcia turns around to say, give me a rematch. And Tank is cracking up laughing. And they had a lot of fun with it, But
Jack, think about that.
Thing is, let me throw this at you, Frank. Had Garcia fought Tank after he beat Haney and Tank knocks Garcia out, imagine the credit Tank would be getting now as opposed to the type he got at the time. So it's all about timing.
But Jack, think about this though. What you just said about Haney. I'm sorry, Ryan Garcia. He's a personality. He had to sit back and say, okay, the spotlight's going to be on Tank. He's going to win, but I'm going to get in the picture somehow. I'm going to have a gimmick on, and everybody's going to talk about that. Who else does that? He gets on people's nerves, but Tyson Fury does that too. And those are the guys that the fans notice. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, But like Ali said, they pay attention. They may come to see me lose or win, but they come to see me.
You know what? You know what I find interesting? These guys who are fighting at 135, 140, they say they'll go up to 147. But if you throw Terence Crawford's name at them, no one wants to fight Terence Crawford. Ryan Garcia would want no part of him. Tank would want no part of him. You know, it's kind of interesting. I don't blame Tank because he's a lightweight. He shouldn't have to go up to one.
And he's not a big lightweight at that.
Right. Let him stay at lightweight. And you're right what you said, Lomachenko. Lomachenko's probably long in the tooth a bit. He's still got a lot left. He's still very, very good, but he's not the Loma of his prime. If it was Loma in his prime, these guys wouldn't be calling him out. It's like the fighters who called Manny Pacquiao out late in Manny's career.
Right. You think that Lomachenko and Tank will fight next? That would be a unification fight.
Tank's where Richard. Well, he's not with Richard Schaefer. I'm sorry, it's with the PBC. Al Heyman. The PBC is hurting business-wise. They need a big mega fight. You know, that infusion of cash to come in. Who would they do business with? They have to do business with someone to get Tank a big fight. Would they be doing it with Top Rank and with Lomachenko? And I don't know what would Top Rank use? What would they use Lomachenko for if it's not Tank Davis? Who could Lomachenko fight that would be a mega fight besides?
Well, Stevenson, but it wouldn't be as big.
It wouldn't be as big. You put Tank against Lomachenko, I think that's really, really big. No, Devin Haney Tank would still be marketable right now. Maybe a little less than before, but it's still marketable because of the personalities and the whole thing involved.
It'd be hard to find. It's hard to find a path for Devin Haney to win that fight, but I agree. It would be marketable.
Yeah, it would be very marketable. But, you know, I mean, there's so many possibilities. Then there's Teofimo Lopez. He fights in a couple of weeks. Steve Claggett in Miami. If he wins that fight, he's in line to fight someone. Does he move up to 147 and fight a Jack Catterall? That's not exactly a mega fight. Or maybe Tank says to Teofimo, we could fight. But Teofimo's a danger man because he could punch like a mule. He's the type of guy you better take seriously if you're moving into him because he could really.
I would pay that fight. I would pay to see that fight at 135. Well, I think 140 too big for Tank, Jack.
Anymore. Teofimo can't make the lightweight division anymore.
Then Tank's not going to 140.
Him and Lomachenko's the most logical fight. I would have to think that Tank would stop Lomachenko because Lomachenko would be there to be hit. But Lomachenko, that herky-jerky style, maybe he makes Tank miss. And the one way to beat Tank, the one way to beat him, Frank, tell me if you agree, is by a superior work rate. He's not always the busiest guy. Doesn't always throw a lot of punches, and Loma does. If Loma could keep throwing a lot of punches and work all 12 rounds, not get nailed with the big punch, Lomachenko just could eke out a decision over Tank. I wouldn't be flabbergasted if he did.
Jack, I think the thing is with Lomachenko, though, I think he has to come forward and force the other guy to react. And I don't know if he would fight Tank that way. I think Tank would force him back. I don't know if he would carry the fight to him. But the dynamic between these two styles is off the hook, and I'd love to see it. I would favor Tank, but look, as you said, Lomachenko's a little long in the tooth. However, I wouldn't count him out because he is a throwback, and he knows what unifying that title would mean against a guy like Tank, because you could make a case Tank is the most skilled fighter he will have been in the ring with. And you could say vice versa.
And a quick word about Frank Martin. He's still a prospect, still a good prospect. He's never going to be an elite fight as far as being on a short list of pound-for-pound guys. But Frank Martin could come back and be a top 20 pound-for-pound guy at some point. Maybe, like I said earlier, win a couple of titles before his career's over. But you kind of want to, match him maybe in a comeback fight with a Raleigh Romero type, the type of fight he could
Right.
win.
All right, Jack, what about the other fight? What about Benavidez and Vosnik? Did you see that? You did see that, right?
I saw it. Benavidez held serve. If you're going to call him the monster, he didn't really build on the momentum in his career. He just didn't do it. I mean, it wasn't like one of those performances that wowed you. That let's say he stopped Vosnik in 7-8 rounds. It was caused a highlight reel knockout. Wow, people would be talking about that fight in
Right.
Benavidez. He didn't gain any momentum. He won clearly over 12 rounds. He tired at the end, in my opinion, and he was sloppy. He wasn't good by the end of the fight. But, win's a win. He won clearly. I think he should concentrate on the light heavyweight division. I'll tell you why, Frank. I get the feeling he's a big guy. He got a lot of trouble making the super middleweight limit. And I don't want to see him starting to fight Canelo and then come in a pound and a half over the weight at the weigh-in. And then Canelo saying, I'm not fighting you, forget about it, and the fight doesn't come off. Because I could see Canelo deciding, I'm not fighting you if you're like as much as a half pound over the weight. I'm not going through with it.
I could see he's in between a rock and a hard place. Joe Bergman, I agree with you. I think he did beat a top 5 light heavyweight. I don't think Vosnik is shot. However, I agree with Jack that Benavidez is tired after the 7th or 8th round. And Jack, the other thing I saw, and I don't know why Vosnik didn't do it sooner, but when he jabbed and he put them in succession, he kind of did stymie Benavidez a little bit. And I was wondering to myself, why didn't we see that earlier? Is it because he couldn't, why Benavidez was strong? But when he was jabbing, he was causing Benavidez problem. Now, Canelo isn't much of a jabber, even though he can jab. I think that fight's still big. I don't know who I like. I don't think Benavidez hurt his case. I don't think he helped it. I did think as you said, he held serve. He's a force, but he needed to be a little more impressive. I don't like him running out of gas, and I don't like the way that the jab sort of nullified his aggression in the last couple rounds because he was winning pretty handily through 8 rounds.
Let me ask you this. So we may be overrating Benavidez just a little bit. Look at his last 3 fights, okay? Caliplant wins a decision, wins clearly. He was less than dominant. He had to take over in the second half of the fight. Caliplant fought a strong fight. It wasn't close.
Smart fight. Benavidez beat him. Physicality.
Demetrius Andrade is outboxing him for 3 rounds until he gets nailed a big punch in the 4th. And we remember that. And then Benavidez finished him, I think it was next round. And then this fight with Vosnik, he looked good on that. He looked good if he's just an ordinary top guy. But if we're thinking he's this monster, then I'm not overly impressed winning a decision, this fight with Vosnik, because I tried to visualize if Bivol Beterbiev was standing in front of Benavidez, what the result would have been. I kind of feel maybe with Bivol, he would have been a little too strong, and maybe he had outpointed Bivol, put him on the defensive a lot. But I kind of feel Beterbiev may have been rocked, but would stand up to his power. And can you imagine that's Beterbiev in the later rounds of the fight hitting Benavidez? Chances are he knocks him out.
Well, because Beterbiev gets stronger as the fight goes on.
Yeah,
Benavidez, we see he winds down a little bit.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me wonder. I mean, are we overrating Benavidez just a little? I'm impressed by him. Don't get me wrong.
Jack,
but it's still, I kind of wonder.
Canelo is really in between a rock and a hard place. I was talking to someone about this the other day. If you're him, what do you do? Do you look, the fight with Crawford is probably more money than Benavidez, but the risk and the embarrassment, if Canelo fought Crawford and lost the decision, all that he's accomplished, a lot of naysayers and people looking for a reason to rip him would remember him for the Mayweather fight and the Crawford fight. And they say, you fought two elite boxers and they both schooled you. So there's risk there. If it were me, Jack, I think I would fight Benavidez before Canelo, because at least I'm fighting a guy who's bigger than me, and I can say he's in his prime, he's younger, he's bigger, and he caught me at the end. Where Canelo with Crawford, it's like, wow, he's older than me and he's smaller than me, and he still took me to school. I think I would fight Benavidez, but I think it's all going to come down to what's Canelo's price? What will it take to get him to cross the line to take the risk to fight Crawford?
I think Crawford has to fight one of them. I mean, not Crawford. I mean, Canelo has to fight one of them, either Crawford or Benavidez, to start getting in serious range of being an all-time great fighter. You know, when we talk about all-time great fighters, you know, they're few and far between. We'll talk about the last few decades. You could talk about, the Sugar Ray Leonards, the Roberto Durans, the Marvin Haglers, the Floyd Mayweathers, and on and on. But Canelo's not quite in that range. Not quite in that range. He'd be rated, I think most people would rate him as an all-time great, a little behind Julio Cesar Chavez, a little behind him. And he needs that big victory to put him over the top, where people are going, wow, this Canelo is great. He could have lived with any fight in history.
But Jack, if he beats Crawford, they're going to say you beat a guy 3 divisions below you. And if he beats Benavidez, they're going to say, well, maybe he wasn't as good as we thought. We're even saying that now.
Well, you can never win in that regard. Look, Terence Crawford scored one of the greatest victories in modern times over Errol Spence. But if you say that now, they'll say, Spence was damaged goods. He was in accidents. He was this and that. Going into the fight, it was a pick'em fight. People were virtually split down the middle because Crawford beat him so decisively and made Spence look bad. People are now dismissive of what Crawford did. So, I mean, it's hard to win. Really, when you get a Leonard and Hearns and the Leonard wins, and then Hearns immediately gets back in action and proves himself to be a great fighter, then it has a lot of value, in that sense.
And the fact that Leonard had to dig down, Jack, it wasn't like Crawford, that was a one-sided fight after the second round. Crawford was never pressed, where Leonard was pressed, was behind, and had to come through adversity. And I think when you do that, you get more props. But, it's funny, on Facebook, things come up on your memories, and it just came up on my post. It was around this time last year that Crawford and Spence signed the fight. I think they signed in mid-June to meet the end of July. And I was reading some of the things that some of the guys said when the fight was signed. And Jack, a lot of it was, boy, Bud's really good, but is he going to be able to stand up to the body punching of Spence? And here now here we look back a year later. Well, Spence really couldn't get to him to even get the body punch going because Crawford basically took care of him before he could get there.
Frank, I enjoy your posts when you post things because I don't think there's anyone in boxing more insightful than you. I really mean that. You're very, very insightful. But of all your posts, my favorite one, and I'm just paraphrasing, you sent out a message basically to say, all you idiots, come up with your prediction right now. I don't want to hear after the fight. I told you just like I predicted because I'm going to unfriend you. I'm cutting you out. So speak up right now because all these guys come out afterwards, Frank. Oh, just as I predicted.
I can't stand that. First of all, Jack, whether you're picking a game between the Chiefs and the 49ers or a boxing match, you have a 50% chance to get it right. And when it comes to human beings, they have bad days, off nights, you just don't know. But some guys take it where if they get it wrong, you won't respect them. Where to me, I look at it this way. You can be wrong if your reasoning, how you got to the conclusion, was good. I don't care about that. Look, Sugar Ray Leonard, who I think may be the best fighter of my lifetime after Ali. Jack, you notice when he never likes to make a pick. He never likes to pick. He'll come up with, this guy's a friend of mine, or he'll say fighter A before 6. And it's like he doesn't like to be wrong. And there's a guy that, you can't question his boxing aptitude or IQ, but some people, when they get it wrong, it really messes with them. And I can tell you this, Jack, I've gotten a lot wrong. I probably got more right. I remember, I didn't know you then, but the guys that know me, well, I told them about this guy, Donald Curry, and he was going to be the guy that, now that Leonard's gone, he might be the guy to set Hearns back. Jack, Donald Curry, he's not an all-time great. Had all-time great skill, perhaps.
All-time great. Curry eventually made it into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. But for about a year and a half, some guys are all-time greats for a very short period of time, for maybe a year and a half. And I'll give you a couple of cases. I'll give you one, a guy I'm fond of, Junior Jones. Junior Jones, over a period of about approximately 18 months or so, beat a peak Marco Antonio Barrera twice. And twice. A good version of Orlando Canizales. Canizales was close to being in his prime, maybe a little under.
Canizales was an outstanding fighter.
Right. But then, he didn't have much of a chin, and then it let him down, against Kennedy McKinney, and then he was mediocre, the rest of his career. But for that small window, Junior Jones that beat Barrera would have been a handful for anyone in boxing history in his weight class. He would have been a threat to beat. Same thing, Pepino Cuevas. For maybe a year and a half.
He was on a tear.
He was devastating. But, some of these guys don't hold that sensational peak long enough. Like the Donald Curry who knocked out Milton McCrory was a truly great fighter.
He was a great fighter.
Right. But he didn't hold that peak, as long. It's like an athlete in another sport having a phenomenal season. But he doesn't.
Jack, let me ask you this. In a little while, we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the Frazier-Quarry rematch. But a couple days ago, Saturday, was the 40th anniversary of the Hearns-Duran fight. I did a post on that.
I saw.
I don't know where you come down, but a lot of guys who hold an opinion that we both value, some of them just can't, because they love Duran so much. They just try to make this perfect scenario where maybe Duran could beat Hearns. Jack, I think it's a suicide match for Duran, just like Foreman was suicide for Frazier. I've never talked to you about this before. Where do you come down on that? Duran and Hearns.
I come down in between, Frank. If you look at Duran, he was pudgy for that fight. That wasn't the Roberto Duran who beat Sugar Ray Leonard in the first fight. Not even close. It was kind of a pudgy version of Duran who wasn't in top shape. Duran still had something left because he won a couple of world titles later on. And ironically, he beat Iran Barkley, the Barkley who beat Hearns twice after that. So you never know. I remember,
but it's a style thing.
But consider this: before the Duran-Hearns fight, they asked Emmanuel Stewart about the fight, and he said, we're probably going to have to win on points because no one really knocks Duran out. And no one had a sharp up boxing eye, I feel, in Emmanuel Stewart. Guys like him and Angelo Dundee, they could spot things miles away. And if he wasn't confident going into the fight, Hearns was going to knock him out. Some fights, I feel, one guy's always going to beat the other. If Hearns fought Hagler 20 times, to me, Hagler's going to beat him every time. No matter what, as long as Hagler is in good form, it doesn't matter what form Hearns is in. I agree with you that the best of Hearns is going to beat the best of Duran. I agree because of the style, because Tommy can go to plan B, he can move and box, and Duran wouldn't be able to do anything with Hearns if he circled him and jabbed him and boxed him. But I don't feel Hearns would have gotten the same devastating knockout against, a peak version of Duran.
So you think the Hearns?
It's not like Foreman and Frazier, in other words, where Foreman's usually always going to knock Joe out. He's always going to dominate him because of the styles. I don't think it would quite be the same in that case. I think Hearns would
All right,
win,
Jack, here's my rebuttal. Number one, Duran was coming off two great fights, Davey Moore and Hagler. Okay? Hearns was only a slight favorite. Jack, within the first minute and a half of that fight, you could see the look on Duran's face that he was in against something he never felt before. And I just think the style matchup, I think the Hearns that ice Cuevas would ice Duran, probably not in 2 rounds, but maybe 4 or 5, because Duran can only fight Hearns one way, inside. To get there, he's got to walk through a bunch of missiles, and that's suicide. And the other thing I will say, Jack, I can't think of another fighter on Duran's level, a great, near great, all-time great, who got defeated as conclusively as Duran did, that didn't ask for a rematch. I don't think it's a coincidence that Duran never said it was a fluke or let me go at him again. I just think it's a bad matchup for Duran.
Well, they don't always ask for a rematch for whatever reason. And I'll give you an example, a similar case. Hurricane Carter stopped Emil Griffith in 1 round. I think that was an aberration. I think if they fought 50 times, that would be the only time he would stop him like
Griffith
that.
was clearly the better fighter.
Yeah, but Griffith never asked for a rematch. And I spoke to Gil Clancy about it once. He says, we didn't think like that back in the day. We didn't have to go in with the guy again and have a rematch and set the record straight. They just weren't thinking that way. Listen, the Duran who beat Leonard, if that Duran fought Hearns, I got to believe early in the fight, he would put Hearns on the defensive. Hearns would circle. He would box. Hearns would settle down. Eventually, Duran's attack would slow somewhat. Hearns would be scoring, and he would eventually take the fight over Hearns. But it would be maybe a long period of time, 7, 8 rounds, before he started really getting control, Hearns. And who knows? I mean, listen.
I can't disagree with that. But I also think there's a case that if they fought again, it would be like Foreman and Frazier, where Frazier would try to back away this time and be the counterpuncher. And I think Duran, after what happened the first time, I think that's the plan he'd go to, and that's a no-win plan. It prolongs the inevitable.
Frank, I want to talk about, I know you're planning at least one of them, 2 anniversary fights 30 years ago during the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase. I don't know where you were. I was in Atlanta.
Watching the Knicks and the Rockets and then the O.J. chase.
You know where I was? I was watching boxing. I was in Atlantic City watching Wayne McCullough win a decision over Victor Rabanales while that was going on. I was in AC. But 50 years ago to the day, I was at Madison Square Garden to see, one of our favorite all-time fighters. Maybe, I never asked you who your favorite was. He might be your all-time favorite. He's one of my all-time favorites. Smoking Joe Frazier beat Jerry Quarry. And I remember predicting before the fight, Frazier would win a decision, thinking Quarry would knock him down a couple of times, but Frazier would survive that, and his overall work rate would prevail, something like 7 rounds to 4 and 1 even. That was my thought. Of course, it was nothing like that. It was one-sided for Smoking Joe. And most people seem to be picking Quarry. They said he was a new man, this and that.
The new Jerry Quarry.
But when we were talking a little while ago about Tommy Hearns, and I mentioned Hagler, if they ever had a rematch, Hearns would try to fight the way Quarry did in the second fight against Frazier. Oh, I'm not going toe to toe with him. I'm going to box. You want to know something? The only way a Jerry Quarry should ever fight a Joe Frazier is to go toe to toe. That, like Joe said after the rematch, I couldn't see where Jerry wanted to go. He didn't have the reach. Where was he going to go? Why was he trying to box me? You know, he just should have came and exchanged punches. Maybe he nails me or whatever. But tell us about that fight, Frank, and tell us about Brown Bomber Joe Lewis in that great fight of bad rep.
The night of the fight, I go with a group of guys that we used to go to these fights with. They were all big Quarry fans, rooting for Quarry, probably basically because he was white, and they wanted to see a guy that looked like them win. Okay, which I can understand that to a point. I was a big fan of both. And they were buying in to the new Jerry Quarry. And I said to those guys, I said, did you guys see the interview with Frazier Saturday on the Wide World of Sports? He says, Jerry Quarry, he said, there's a new Jerry Quarry. He says, until I hit him. He goes, and once I catch him with a good shot, he's going to be the old Jerry Quarry.
I love it.
And that's, Jack, I said to those guys, I says, Quarry will be good for a while, but once Frazier hits him with a shot that gets the crowd, one of them ooh shots that the crowd reacts to, Quarry's going to dig his toes into the canvas, and they're going to go toe-to-toe. That's Joe's fight, and it'll be downhill for Quarry. Jack, that fight bummed me out because I picked Frazier to win, but I didn't think it would be so one-sided by the third round as it was. Frazier hit him with some left hooks that I don't know how he stood up. I don't know. And Quarry, it was a tough guy, but one guy was a near great. The other guy was an all-time great. Quarry could never box Joe, Jack, because Joe doesn't let you box. He forces you to fight. He didn't let Ali box. Jerry Quarry certainly not going to box. And Frazier, if you remember, Eddie Futch was with him back then. Joe looked good, and that was resurgence. And Frazier was not yelling, but he says, I want the winner of Ali Foreman. I have a score to settle with both of them. And I remember watching the interview that night thinking, this Joe Frazier has a shot with either guy. It was a one-sided fight. It was the end of Quarry as a contender. It was resurgent of Joe Frazier. And as you said, Joe Lewis had a terrible night, shouldn't have been the referee, and he almost got Jerry killed where Frazier was yelling for him to stop the fight.
You know, Joe Frazier loved Joe Lewis. He always said that's his guy. But during the fifth round of the fight, Quarry kind of motions in a way to Lewis. He's had enough, you know, and under those circumstances, it's fine. He had enough. And Lewis looks at him and then brings the fight.
And he waved him back in.
Mix it up, boys. And then John Condon, who was in charge of PR of Madison Square Garden, is yelling, damn it, Joe, even Quarry doesn't want the fight to go on to stop it, which makes you kind of think, in this day and age, we're so meticulous who the ref is to get a ref, at least who we think can have control of a fight. In the old days, they would just pick haphazardly anyone to ref, like Jersey Joe Walcott in the Ali Liston rematch. You know, come on. You pick really inexperienced refs. They'd be former fighters, and we just throw in. But for that fight, Joe Frazier used the right hand more than he did at any point in his career. And that's what surprised people. And all of a sudden they were thinking, wow, if Ali's fighting this version of Frazier, who has this type of right hand, and they were thinking Ali didn't beat him by that big of a margin in the rematch a few months before.
And Frazier did land some good right hands in that fight too.
Right. Had that the Frazier, the second Quarry fight, they wondered, could that Frazier maybe have won the Ali rematch? But that fight basically finished Quarry because mentally he knew he wasn't a new man. and all the good feeling he had on the comeback. He said after the fight,
Jack, he had such a great year in '73, beating Shavers and Lyle. And on June 17th, he also beat Mac Foster in 1970.
Well, yeah, that was way before. That was
right, but I'm saying June 17th, he had some big fights.
What's forgotten before the Frazier rematch? A scare was thrown into Quarry. The one fight before that, he fought a
Joe Alexander.
Joe Alexander at the Nassau Coliseum, and Alexander knocked him down in the first round. You know, a hard knockdown too.
At the end of the first round.
Knocked Alexander down in the second round. So you figure, okay, it's just one of those things. Give Alexander credit. He caught me, but I finished him quick. He still wasn't in my class. And I wonder had Quarry somehow beaten Frazier, somehow, what would have happened with his career? That was June of '74. Would he? I guess he
would have got the Ali Foreman winner, Jack.
And would have been okay. A peak. We know Ali would have beaten Quarry 100 out of 100. No discussion even on that. Could Quarry at his best have beaten any version of George Foreman ever?
Let me think about that. No shot. Doesn't hit hard enough to hurt him. If he lets Foreman come to him, which he really would have, which he probably would do anyhow, Foreman would eat him up with his jab. That fight would look like Foreman and Chuvalo, I think. Quarry would take a terrible beating, Jack.
Yeah, I
don't believe what George says, how he was afraid of him and he ducked. And we know George talks the talk, but he could never beat him. But if Quarry beat Frazier in the rematch, he would have been and think about this. Ali and Foreman, the winner of Ali Foreman, Ali would have loved to have faced Quarry in early '75 if he beats Foreman, because Quarry beating Frazier, Ali would have promoted the black and the white, and the two fights before it would have been a huge fight.
Well, there was talk about Quarry being a new man, and had he somehow gotten by Joe, all the talk, hey, he really is a new man, and he'd be calling out Ali. You know, listen, it was fun, but it wasn't meant to be 50 years ago. It was a devastating loss for Quarry, and it showed that Smoking Joe had a lot left, and he proved it in Manila against Ali that he had a lot left.
Yes, he did. Jack, did you ever see the post I put up about Quarry and Frazier at the banquet?
Oh, yeah, they went in the men's room and they exchanged punches to the body.
Tom Brookshire told me this story because he used to commentate with Quarry, and being a Philly guy, he and Joe were very close. And he was at the award dinner, and they got bored, and they went into the bathroom and started hitting each other with body shots. And then they came out, and both their jackets were ruffled. And then he found out afterwards when he talked to them what they were doing. I think that's a great story. Tom Brookshire, Jack, had some great stories.
I kind of have to feel that was a little exaggerated. I guess Quarry and Frazier were fond of one another. They liked one another, but I can't believe they'd be hitting one another in the body hard. It would be, but then again, you never know. I mean, with the fighters.
He said Tom's not the type guy to ad-lib stuff. He said they both walked out. They were wondering what was going on, and they went in the bathroom, and they did a little bit of duking it out. I'm sure they weren't throwing everything they had, but just to get a little sweat going, to get the blood going and feel good. I think it's a great story, and you're right. Frazier and Quarry liked each other. Frazier had a lot of respect for Quarry, and I remember reading an article where Quarry said, Jack, and I can relate to this, I know you can too, but before he fought Frazier the first time, he said, look, he goes, maybe I can't beat Ali. Ellis is tough, but fighters know, and I know Frazier's made for me, and I know I can beat him. And it's like, some fighters are in the presence of another, and they feel that way, and Jerry was wrong.
In closing, credit Quarry when he lost to Frazier the first time. He says, everything was working. My hands were good. This was good. My problem was I was in the ring with too much fighter. So he did give
He did
credit,
say
and
that.
he never disputed the Ellis decision. Quarry really didn't make as many excuses when he lost as people think he did. Frank, and and on that note, a lot of fun reminiscing about it, and it brings back memories from 50 years ago to this day.
All right, Jack. Everybody, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Until then,